Welcome to this one of our many webinars, which is part of a much larger project that we have in collaboration with. Sorry, I'm just going to turn this. Okay, I'll start over. Sorry, everyone. The lawn, I didn't realize my neighbor was going to mow the lawn in this exact moment. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming. This is one of many webinars that we have as part of our national project, Awareness to Action. From screening and assessment to developing appropriate parenting plans after family violence. So this is a project that's been put together with 5 different regional research centers examining gender-based violence. We have collaborated on a variety of different initiatives. This particular part of the project is looking at a variety of ways of assessing and examining family violence. So today's webinar is going to focus on the experiences, risk factors, and some of the particular considerations around prevention with respect to intimate partner violence and homicide among older adults. Lastly, just before we get started, we'd like to take this moment just to remind us all about the traditional lands that we may be currently situated on. I'm coming to you here along the banks of the Lewistic, which is the river that runs next to Fredericton or Eppahawk. In this case, we want to just ask you to think about which traditional or ancestral lands you may find yourself on, to take the moment to reflect on that, thanking the generations of Indigenous people who have cared for these lands. And we also want to bring a reminder that this work that we do both here in the webinar, in our own lives, it's really about trying to make that promise of truth and reconciliation real. And in particular, within the context of gender-based violence, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across the country. So we sort of ask that reflection to inform our discussions both in this webinar and as we take that work forward. So I'm now going to ask the project coordinator, Dr. Mary Aspinall, to introduce our webinar speakers.
Great, thank you, Carla. So I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for this afternoon. We're very fortunate we have folks from New Brunswick and Nova Scotia to share their wealth of knowledge with all of us today. So Lisa Marie Hunter is an individual case specialist with the seniors branch at the Office of the New Brunswick Advocate, where she advocates for older adults and helps ensure their rights and voices are recognized across the province. She's born and raised in Fredericton, previously spent 8 years with the Department of Justice as a court stenographer, primarily in the family division, and also served as an investigator with the Office of the Ombudsman. Lisa earned her paralegal and legal administration diploma from the Atlantic Business College in 2011 and is currently pursuing a double major in criminology and gerontology at St. Thomas University. She's very passionate about social justice and systemic advocacy. Katherine Cake also serves as an individual case specialist with the seniors branch of the Office of the New Brunswick Advocate, like Lisa. In this role, she's dedicated to supporting and advocating for the rights of older adults throughout the province, with a background that includes roles at the RCMP, the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Centre, and the Department of Justice. Katherine is deeply passionate about mental health, systemic advocacy, and combating ageism. She's originally from Grand Falls and currently completing a double major in gerontology and psychology at St. Thomas University. And last but certainly not least, we have Kristina Fifield. Kristina is an intersectional feminist trauma therapist who supports survivors and families impacted by gender-based and family violence. Her therapeutic practice is rooted in principles of intersectionality, equity, trauma-informed care, and social justice-driven community healing. Kristina participated in the Mass Casualty Commission public inquiry and co-authored a report for the Commission highlighting systemic issues related to gender-based violence for marginalized survivors. In 2023, she was appointed to the Progress Monitoring Committee to represent the gender-based violence and advocacy sector. Her work on the advisory committee for the Leafs Accountability Project and co-leading the Gender-Based Violence Advocacy Coalition in Nova Scotia underscores her commitment to promoting accountability for gender-based violence. So I think we would all agree we are very fortunate to have such a fantastic lineup this afternoon with their many, many accolades and expertise. So just before our first speakers take the reins here, just very quickly, we also wish to share some context about today's topic. And this might be a bit of a somber introduction, but we did wish to acknowledge the reality of these occurrences of intimate partner abuse, especially when worst case scenario happens, which of course would be intimate partner homicide. All of our Atlantic provinces have seen and continue to see events of intimate partner homicide, but unfortunately, Nova Scotia does have the spotlight right now in this region when it comes to cases that are involving older adults. So we wanted to share this timeline, and this is just within the last year. So there's 74-year-old Judith Organ, 59-year-old Brenda Tatlock Burke, 49-year-old Nicole Murphy, a 71-year-old unnamed female, 60-year-old Elaine Mosher, and 83-year-old Patricia Towner were all killed by their partners. This information does align with other statistics we do continue to see about instances of intimate partner violence that either are reported to the police or are events that contain very serious physical harm, more often being female victims and more often being male perpetrators. And that holds true for these 6 cases that we share here. And so we just wanted to highlight this to recognize that with all the terminology, all the research, the programs, the resources, all the things you're going to hear about this afternoon, at the heart of it, real people are impacted by this. And so we keep these victims and their families in mind and in our thoughts as we hear from our experts this afternoon. So on that note, we are going to turn it over to Katherine and Lisa. So I'll stop sharing my screen and you can share yours. And as Carla mentioned, if you have questions as we go, please put them in the Q&A box. We will address your questions at the end of the webinar. And so Katherine and Lisa, whenever you're ready, the floor is all yours.
Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lisa Marie Hunter, and I'm an individual case specialist at the Office of the New Brunswick Advocate. Today, along with my colleague, Katherine Cake, we'll be discussing how our office responds to the complex needs of older adults in the province, particularly when it comes to elder abuse, intimate partner violence, and the challenges of aging. So to begin, I want to give a brief overview of our office and our mandate. The Advocate is an officer of the legislature, which means we're independent from any government department or office. We operate under the Child, Youth, and Senior Advocate Act. We have the authority to access information, conduct investigations, and review government services. This independence is crucial as it allows us to focus solely on protecting the rights and interests of the people that we serve. For today's purposes, I'm just going to be discussing the vulnerable adults and older adults section of our office. So here's a snapshot of our core responsibilities under our Act. We ensure that rights are understood, protected, and promoted. We make sure people's voices are heard, especially in forums where those voices might not otherwise or might be overlooked. We help individuals access services. We ensure complaints about those services receive proper attention. We also provide advice to government bodies and the broader community about how services can be improved. And overall, we advocate for the rights and interests, not just individually, but systemically. Our jurisdiction is quite broad. We can look into matters involving provincial government departments, health authorities, commissions, boards, and other government-created bodies. We also cover municipal governments and service providers like nursing homes, special care homes, and home support services when they're contracted by the government. With this wide reach, it allows us to engage in both the individual and systemic levels. We operate in 2 main streams of advocacy. First, we have the individual advocacy, which helps people on a case-by-case basis. It's more of the day-to-day stuff, and we resolve very specific issues. And then you have the systemic advocacy where we push for broader policy change. And that's where we kind of see patterns with widespread concerns. Both are essential and they often overlap. Many systemic reviews actually begin on the individual side and the information learned from those investigations. Individual advocacy can take 2 forms. There's quick resolution, which involves straightforward information sharing or support to help someone self-advocate. Complex advocacy involves more hands-on, long-term support. These cases often require coordination with multiple service providers. For vulnerable populations, like many of the older adults we serve, this support is often vital. It helps overcome barriers like discrimination, language difficulties, and lack of access to information. So here are two examples of type of calls that we might get. The first situation is someone's contacting us because their request for repairs to their Housing New Brunswick unit has been denied. They've stopped receiving responses to their phone calls. So in this situation, our office can engage with Housing New Brunswick to review the criteria used in the decision and advocate for reconsideration. We can also follow up directly to address the breakdown in communication as well. In another scenario, a person reaches out because the financial contribution that is required for them to live in a new nursing home or a special care home is too high in relation to their income. We can contact the Department of Social Development, request justification, and ask for a reassessment if the amount appears inconsistent with the person's financial circumstances. And then just two more other examples. One case, someone could be having trouble accessing the full number of home support service hours they were assessed and approved for. We can follow up with the Department of Social Development to confirm what steps were taken and advocate to ensure the individual receives the full hours based on their documented needs. Another example is an individual living in a care home and they're reporting that they've been physically or psychologically abused. If the incident has already been reported to Adult Protection, then we would follow up with them to ensure it's being addressed appropriately. If they haven't reported it, obviously we would suggest that they do that, but we would also take action ourselves to ensure that they actually reported it. And if they didn't, then we would actually do the referral ourselves. That way, it doesn't get lost in the system. So just some stats, between April 2023 and March 2024, our office on the vulnerable and older adult side had 399 individual advocacy case files. And then from April 2024 to December 2024, we had 232 files. So this kind of gives us a real-time insight into the issues people are facing, and it often informs our decisions to launch broader systemic reviews. Some examples of our recent systemic work include a comprehensive review of the long-term care system and an urgent proposal for reform. We've also examined how government manages social policy more broadly, and we released a report entitled He Deserved Better, which focuses on one man's experience in long-term care. These reviews are often driven by trends that we observe on the individual advocacy side, and they aim to hold systems accountable while proposing actionable solutions. So as you can see, the individual advocacy work gives us a close-up view of the challenges that older adults face in navigating systems. But when we start seeing patterns, especially in cases involving abuse, we know we're dealing with more than just an isolated incident. This brings us to a critical issue that often falls through the cracks. What happens when elder abuse intersects with intimate partner violence in older adults? So Katherine is going to take us deeper into this intersection, exploring how overlapping risks and systemic failures create unique barriers for older victims of abuse. Katie, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lisa. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So when we're looking at the intersection of elder abuse and intimate partner violence, we really have to understand that risk and the systemic barriers created. Some of the definitions and overlap on this, I'll just go over quickly. So elder abuse is harm towards older adults by someone in a position of trust. Intimate partner violence is violence from a romantic partner and can continue in older age. In older adults, intimate partner violence is often misclassified as elder abuse, and it creates confusion between the police and adult protection services. Older victims of intimate partner violence experience such unique challenges and barriers that keep them from living free from harm. It's also very underreported. In elder abuse, only 1 in 5 incidents are reported. The types of abuse, it might be physiological, financial, and physical abuse. And we also see an increase. So women in Canada are 8 times more likely to be killed by a spouse than men. So we're going to take a look at the systemic response gaps. We see that adult protection, they may not intervene if an older adult chooses to stay. Police may decline to act, treating it as a social service matter, and the result is that victims fall through the cracks due to jurisdictional confusion. The Future Us is a program that launched in 2022. It's Pan-Canadian Engagement Strategy, and it's been created to outline a roadmap for preventing elder abuse. They prioritize prevention, establish and support abuse prevention networks at local, regional, and national levels, and they help raise awareness among everyone about how do I identify and respond to abuse and neglect. Elder abuse networks play a significant role in raising awareness about intimate partner violence, particularly with the older adult population. The dynamics of intimate partner violence in this demographic are highly complex. They underscore the necessity for integrated, multidisciplinary services and supports to effectively address the issue. Some of the provinces currently have a formalized network. So you see them there. We've got Northwest Territories, British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, Newfoundland, Labrador. Nova Scotia has a strategy only as well, and PEI has a network only. The ones that don't, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Yukon, and Nunavut. It is very helpful to have formalized networks because they do help deliver these public educations. It enhances community coordination, participates in knowledge sharing, helps to contribute ideas, experiences, and innovations, and it supports collective action. We've got to look at the vulnerability and risks associated with older adults. One of the biggest one would be social isolation. As individuals age, they often lose social contacts and family. It leads to isolation. For older adults facing intimate partner violence, this lack of support hinders their ability to recognize it or address the abuse. Another issue is the health and mobility issues. Older adults may have physical limitations or chronic illnesses that make it hard for them to escape abuse. The reliance on a partner for care can silence them about the situation, and cognitive decline further exacerbates the situation. There's also a matter of coercive control. Older adults that are facing intimate partner violence, it involves behaviors that are aimed at dominating and manipulating them through intimidation and emotional abuse. It undermines the victim's autonomy and self-esteem, leaving them feeling powerless and trapped. Financial dependence is another big one. A lot of older adults rely on their partners for financial support, and that's particularly when one partner manages their shared income or pensions. This dependence can hinder their ability to leave abusive relationships, leading to risks like homelessness and limited funds. There's also the societal and generational beliefs. Older adults often grow up in domestic violence was seldom discussed. It leads to feelings of shame, fear of judgment when seeking help, and men in particular might find it difficult to admit they've been abused. Prolonged exposure to intimate partner violence can also lead to very negative health outcomes. It's linked to several negative health issues that can impact the heart, muscles, bones, as well as the digestive, reproductive, and nervous systems. Many of these conditions are chronic. So some of the signs of intimate partner violence in older adults that you can look for. Older adults, family members, community support workers, they should all be aware of these signs. It can also be very subtle or mistakenly attributed to factors like aging and illness. Some of the little indicators you can look for: physical injuries, unexplained bruises, cuts, frequent injuries with inconsistent explanations can be concerning. In older adults, it can be challenging to identify the cause of the bruising, since it could result from aging skin, which becomes more sensitive and prone to pain and bruising. Additionally, underlying health conditions or medications can also contribute to this issue. We also look for emotional changes, sudden mood swings, depression, anxiety, which may indicate emotional or psychological abuse. With older adults, a lot of times they won't say, oh, I'm depressed, oh, I'm anxious. It will come out as physical symptoms. I have a stomach ache. It doesn't go away. It's always there. I have a headache. I can't sleep. I don't know why. So it's going to be physical issues that come out when it's really emotional issues that they're dealing with. There's also social withdrawal, isolating from friends, family, and that's all usually encouraged by a controlling partner, and financial discrepancies, unusual bank transactions, unpaid bills, sudden changes in financial status, and recognizing these signs can be crucial in providing help and support to those affected. When it comes to caregiving and dependency, it is a huge one that we see. It can create a lot of issues. Emotional, financial, physical abuse can be exacerbated by life circumstances and age-related changes, making it more difficult to seek help and to recognize abusive patterns. Psychological violence becomes more prominent with advancing age. Threats of abandonment, withholding food, medication, and other controlling behaviors occur more frequently. When intimate partners are also the caregivers, the control exhibited by caregivers often leaves the victims feeling powerless and convinced that no alternative options are available, particularly when confronting health or mobility challenges. This reliance on caregivers, combined with the perception that they are the sole source of caregiving, significantly hampers the ability to individuals to extricate themselves from abusive situations. We often get cases like that we see where they were told that there's no other options, there's no caregivers out there, there's a lack of support, or the threat of, I will send you to a home. Some of the barriers that we see to reporting services, there's definitely the generational stigma. Cohorts may believe that the abuse is private, they don't want to talk about it. Older victims may have lived through decades of physical, sexual, emotional, or financial abuse and trauma. Older women may be less likely to report instances of intimate partner violence due to those factors, including the generational beliefs about privacy, stigma surrounding the divorce or separation, and a lack of awareness about what support services are available to them. Shelters are very inaccessible for older adults, especially when they have health needs, and LGBTQ plus older adults face added discrimination. When we're looking at the legal landscape in Canada, there's no specific federal offense for elder abuse cases addressed under assault, theft. Now, Nova Scotia Adult Protection Act allows intervention for those unable to protect themselves. In New Brunswick, Family Services Act covers abuse, neglect of vulnerable adults. And one of the biggest barriers observed in instances of intimate partner violence, it involves the issue of competency. It's essential to explore whether the decision-making capacity is being affected by cognitive decline or if it's by perceived loss of control. Assessing this is often one of the most challenging aspects. At the New Brunswick Advocate, cases frequently involve concerns about cognitive decline, and that poses a lot of challenges. If a client hasn't been deemed incompetent and they appear to be competent, they have the right to refuse both assessment and services. Ultimately, it's a medical professional who's responsible for determining competency. Given the current state of the healthcare system and the backlog in the judicial system, evaluating competency is not an easy task. Additionally, it's important to consider the concept of agency. Older adults have the same rights to accept or refuse services as anyone else. A vital question to contemplate is the relationship between the decision-making processes and violence. Information on the association is very limited, and existing studies have highlighted the complexity of examining decision-making within the context of gender-based violence. Perceived control affects motivation, behavior, and particularly in relationships. Important factors in this context include intention, attitude, and social norms. For example, when one partner uses force to control the other, the woman's view of her own control can influence traditional behaviors. Attitudes form through experience and affect how people respond to situations. These attitudes connect with emotions and beliefs that shape intentions, giving meaning to behavior. This underscores the importance of educating people about intimate partner violence, as well as highlighting the available services and support out there. We should continue providing the information and assistance, even if it seems like individuals are not connecting or reaching out initially. For example, I recently conducted a mental health workshop for a group of older adults focused on care options. Despite the efforts to engage the audience, there was very little participation and only one person asked a question. I finished the presentation and I felt quite a bit defeated. But to my surprise, nearly every attendee approached me afterwards to take a business card and a handout on mental health resources. While they might not be speaking up, they're definitely listening. And some of the key takeaways that we've got is intimate partner violence in older adults is often misunderstood as elder abuse. Dependency and systemic acts worsen the risk, and coordinated responses and age-inclusive intimate partner violence services are critical. Thank you all so much for your time, and I'll hand this over to Kristina to continue the presentation.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Kristina. I'm just gonna try to get my screen up here to share. All right. So I think it's really important when we're having these conversations around intimate partner violence and how it shows up in community is that we oftentimes terminology, people don't have the proper terms. I think there's not shared agreements about terminology when we're looking at gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. So I just want to put this, I have this slide up here because I think it's important. So oftentimes when we're looking at intimate partner violence, it can be used interchangeably with domestic violence, and it is more specific than just gender-based violence. And we need to make sure that when we're looking at relationships, that we're understanding that this can be casual relationships, it can be individuals that are legal partners, it can be an ex-partner. And when we're looking at the different types of intimate partner violence, I think too often and across society, one thing I have continued to notice, and there hasn't been much of a shift in my work over the past 16 years, is that many individuals impacted by intimate partner violence and other forms of gender-based violence, still there's a belief that if there's no physical violence, that they're not experiencing intimate partner violence. So I think we need to continue raising awareness of this. This, again, when we're looking at the generational beliefs that many older adults have internalized, this is really important when we're looking at working with individuals that might be in an intimate partner violent relationship. So IPV is any behavior by an intimate partner or ex-partner that causes physical, sexual, or psychological harm, including physical aggression, sexual coercion, psychological abuse, including controlling behaviors, coercive control. Oftentimes across society, individuals don't know what that means. Coercive control is not part of our criminal code right now. There is work being done across Canada around that, but it's really important that when we're looking at coercive control, that we understand how that shows up in relationship and the seriousness of those types of behaviors and actions that exist. When coercive control exists in relationships, it is more commonly associated with death and intimate partner femicide. And again, too often, this form of violence is normalized and minimized and not seen as serious. So again, the amount of education and awareness that is needed. And I think it's really also important with terminology that when individuals, so intimate partner femicide is oftentimes not what police or media are using when they're referring to women being killed, women or binary or trans folks being killed by their partner or former partner. And I really do think that this is important terminology to be using when individuals are being killed because of being a woman or a gender diverse individual. And There is going to be more work being done across Canada. I was in Ottawa last week. There's a lot of work to be done on this, but too often, because we're not seeing when we're hearing about individuals being killed, because this is not being labeled and named. Often we're not seeing the prevalence of this, and we have an epidemic of intimate partner violence. We have an epidemic of intimate partner violence and femicide. So that's why terminology is really important. And I just need to, with individuals that are attending today, it's so important that we are acknowledging the normalization of violence and how it continues to show up across all parts of community, within different communities across Canada, how it shows up in our services, how it shows up in government. And it involves cultural beliefs and values that treat gender-based violence and violence as normal. And it's just a normal part of relationships. And this normalization both increases the rates of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence and decreases the ability to recognize and respond to that violence. And when we're looking at the cultural shift needed in regards to the epidemic of intimate partner violence that we're experiencing, we need to continue to work with not normalizing violence. Too often, violence, and especially when we're looking at intimate partner violence, has been kept in a silo. It's been labeled as a private matter, and we know how harmful it is when violence stays in that silo. And too often, because individuals don't know how to respond to violence and how it's showing up, it continues to be normalized. And when violence is normalized, those who experience or witness it may not question it. They may not be relating it. They might not, their experiences, they don't see it as violence. They remain silent about it. And also, because of how society normalizes this violence, there's so many harmful stereotypes and victim blaming, which again prevents people from coming forward. So when we look at working with older adults, how might the normalization of intimate partner violence impact older adults? And there's so many different aspects of this. And I'll share a few, but the generational aspects of this, when we're working those beliefs and attitudes that have been held, oftentimes the hyper responsibility that women experience and the roles that they have taken on, they oftentimes internalize a lot of beliefs, negative beliefs about themselves around blame and guilt and shame, which keeps individuals from reaching out. Oftentimes in my work with survivors and victims over the years, including working with older adults, is that family and friends, when they do speak up, come forward looking for support, that oftentimes they're not believed. The violence is normalized and minimized. There's a lot of pressure that comes from adult children when they're looking at the relationship between their parents, and why women sometimes continue to feel further isolation from speaking up or leaving. Another part of this is, and this, becomes a challenge, is oftentimes when an individual is married, based on those faith and religious beliefs, this is another barrier that is very often seen in working with older adults. And because of those vows, their relationship with God or their faith, they feel that they need to stay within that relationship. So that's all important things to be considering and to be aware of in working with individuals that might be experiencing intimate partner violence. The epidemic, so a lot of this has already been mentioned, but I think it's really important to say often, and this is with the recent femicides that have taken place in Nova Scotia. When we look at those recent femicides around intimate partner violence, how many of these femicides have taken place in rural communities when people are older? And because of the lack of resources, I'm going to say with the funding that is coming, that has continued to be funded to community-based organizations across Canada, based on province and territory, Oftentimes, the funding that is going to services like transition houses, sexual assault centers, other places that support individuals being impacted, there's not designated money in regards to working with older adults. So they get, lumped in with all of the other services. And too often, and I'll say from working in a transition house for over 12 years, how many barriers exist within transition houses in working with older adults and the barriers that many people experience. And if you add and compound the rural complexities of this, it makes it very difficult. I live rurally. I often think about, if someone was experiencing intimate partner violence, cell phone coverage. I'm just going to speak from Nova Scotia, but there's very rural parts of Nova Scotia, and cell phone coverage is a huge barrier at times. Also, transportation and being isolated from people. So if there's coercive control, the partner is controlling and isolating, and there's financial aspects of this, it makes it very difficult, especially for older women and gender diverse individuals, to leave that relationship. There's a deep embedded culture of silence that exists in marginalized and rural communities. And again, there's many risks at times for people speaking up. And because of fear of retaliation, because of fear of being rejected by family and friends, this is again the compounding impacts of what people are continuing to experience, and especially for or older adults experiencing IPV. I think it's really important. I know I'm, moving through this really quick, but just putting some of this stuff out there for consideration if you're curious about, as service providers and as individuals in showing up, maybe in the relationship you have with family, with friends, whatever role you play at work. If you're a frontline service provider, a lawyer, person in HR, when we're working with individuals that have been impacted by intimate partner violence or other forms of abuse, it is so important that intimate partner violence is understood and the neurobiology of trauma. And too often, when we're looking at our systems that are there to support, so if we're looking at policing, if we're looking at our justice system, if we're looking at adult protection, if we're looking at individuals that are doing those capacity assessments, um, oftentimes trauma is not understood. Our medical model currently, again, fails to recognize trauma, the impacts of abuse and intimate partner violence, and how those symptoms show up. We have a lot of work to do across Canada around acknowledging this. It's a huge barrier. And oftentimes, those symptoms that individuals are experiencing can be not acknowledged, not understood. So when we're looking at working with individuals that you're coming in, you have no knowledge of what is going on, being very aware of what's going on, their body language, how they're responding to you. When a person has gone through trauma, and with intimate partner violence, these are relational traumas and they rewire the brain, right? So when we're looking at working with older adults, their brain has been, because of that relationship, if this has been long-term relationship, that impacts their brain, right? That impacts how they're showing up, and it impacts how they're relating with the world around them. The frontal lobe, when it is offline, and oftentimes when people are triggered and have been impacted by intimate partner violence, is why things are often missed when individuals are being, talking to their doctor, talking to their lawyer, talking to, a person that's providing support, a family member. When the frontal lobe is offline, we can see hyperarousal. So there's lots of different symptoms attached with that. Also, when an individual is not in their window of tolerance, so in a window of tolerance, a person is able to tolerate overwhelm, is able to, deal with difficult situations with their frontal lobe being offline. Relational trauma impacts the brain and the body. And oftentimes, professionals are not trained to screen for this, including many health regulated professionals, our justice system. So, if you have a curiosity about this, this is so important in working with individuals. I put this out there because it's important in working with individuals impacted by intimate partner violence, what those symptoms look like. It's also important when we're able to acknowledge that some of these myths and beliefs and victim blaming, that's a way of debunking what is showing up for folks. I think it's really important when we're looking at if we're engaging with individuals that might be experiencing intimate partner violence, that we are coming prepared in meetings to be able to screen for that, being aware of that. If you're doing intakes with individuals, again, do you have a place on your intake to be screening for these things? This is important. There is a lot of work that is needed for many different health regulated professionals, other, workplaces, for so many different professionals that are working with folks. And this is often not a part of screening and intake. So there's a huge opportunity in addressing the epidemic of gender-based violence. We need to ensure that, again, that trauma awareness, the understanding how the neurobiology of trauma shows up for folks when working. So if this is not something that is built into your practice, having a curiosity of learning more about that. Risk assessments and danger assessments is really important. I was in Ottawa last week in my role on the Progress and Monitoring Committee, and oftentimes in the work of intimate partner violence, it's only been like transition houses and victim services that been dealing with doing high risk for lethality and danger assessments. And what we have learned is that many individuals don't reach out to those supports and services. So we need to get more people trained on risk assessments, on danger assessments, and being able to screen for those lethality markers. So, a pilot project that's happening in Alberta is recently family lawyers have been trained, over 400 family lawyers have been trained in the danger assessment. And this again speaks to ensuring that people that might be coming in contact with individuals have that knowledge and support to be able to screen and to be able to build safety plans for individuals that have been impacted. So if you have a curiosity, in Nova Scotia, a lot of high risk for lethality is done through the Jacqueline Campbell Danger Assessment. Also, ODERA, which is a police screening for risk. That's the Ontario Domestic Assault Risk Assessment. That looks at recidivism. Jacqueline Campbell Danger Assessment looks at lethality. Some of these assessments are not, there's a lot of work to be done about becoming culturally responsive and relevant. There is other risk assessments, the RISA Risk Identification Safety Assessment that has been created out of the Barbara Schieffer Clinic, really looks at more of these intersections around screening and assessment. So encouraging people to take a look at that. It's really important that you have knowledge of this and working with individuals, and that you become comfortable in being able to work with these tools if this is relevant for the work you're doing. In safety planning, knowledge is power. So by being here today and getting some knowledge and getting aware, getting some education on this, it's really important. When working with individuals that have been impacted by intimate partner violence, warm handoffs are really important, and a trauma-informed approach is key. Too often, people are just being passed along because, again, so many organizations, so many service providers are not trained and not comfortable. And oftentimes that warm handoff is not happening. So if you don't know how to respond to the person who is sharing for the first time what they're experiencing, so think about being an older adult, sharing for the first time that there's safety issues, that violence is increasing and it's intensifying, that they're concerned. And if you don't have those tools and you don't know the resources available, that might be the only opportunity for that person, right? If how you respond to them decides maybe how that person is going to reach out in the future, or if they go in shutdown and just internalize more about themselves and, carrying that shame and guilt or feeling a burden. Too often, survivors of intimate partner violence are carrying heavy burdens. They have internalized many negative beliefs. They oftentimes, because again, the normalization of violence, have internalized that they have done something wrong, they're doing something wrong, they're at fault. So that's why it's really important that we know how to respond when individuals are sharing. It doesn't mean you have to be experts in this, but you need to have the resources available to help be able to navigate that and doing those warm handoffs. Those warm handoffs are key. And I really do think there's more work to be done across all sectors and systems and how we work together to ensure those warm handoffs are taking place. Individuals might have a high risk for lethality designation, or they might be deemed high risk. And the reality is that some individuals will continue to stay in the relationship. It's really important to not be judgmental when we're working with older adults, especially. We want to ensure that they are not experiencing more isolation. So if they're sharing with you and they are deciding to stay at that time, it's giving as many resources and tools and leaving that door open. And safety planning is key. We should all be trained in how to safety plan. And on some of the Barbara Scheifer Clinic, in regards to that danger assessment they have great safety plans there. So again, if you're not familiar with some of these resources, getting comfortable with it, taking a look at that is really important. And I know I'm going fast, but I want to give time for questions here. Gender-based violence embodied activism. We all have an individual and collective responsibility to take action. And I just need to share that in my work. So as a supervisor, supervising clinicians, other social workers, the work I do across the country is that too often people are very uncomfortable when we're talking about intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. And if this is, you've shown up here today, if you're uncomfortable, if there's a lot of fear attached with maybe approaching this work or having questions about this work, or, you don't know where to start with this work, we need to sit with that uncomfortable, because it's really important that we're able to work with our own nervous systems in supporting the people that might be reaching out to us. And whether that's in a professional role or in as a role as a family member, a friend, it is so important that we are getting the tools to prepare ourselves in responding to the epidemic. And there's so many ways across Canada right now. There's so many ways of getting involved in this work, but it's so important that, especially in working with older adults, that we're continuing to put this at the forefront of the advocacy around the epidemic and really asking for specialized resourcing and funds and funding to support this population, because there is different complexities that need to be considered, and nuances of this in the work ahead. So again, if you're not familiar with the work, we had the mass casualty event that took place here in Nova Scotia back in 2020. We have many recommendations that are in that inquiry. We have missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and many other inquests and inquiries. There's many ways of getting involved in intimate partner violence and gender-based violence advocacy work. And we do all have an individual and collective responsibility around that. So thank you.